Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook on this Friday, January the 9th. And I'm Marc-Antoine Godin, and you are Arpin Basu. Hello,
Yeah,
Arpin.
I am. Hello.
Yes. It's fun.
Pretty big week. Pretty big show.
Yeah.
It's been a big week.
It's been an entertaining week. It's lots going on, I find. A lot of good, positive things going on.
Yeah, for sure. The two games at the Bell Center, back-to-back nights. This week marked the beginning of what I think is going to become a thing at the Bell Center, which is the wave happening. But it was reflective. You know, it happened spontaneously, obviously, on Wednesday. I feel like the crowd Thursday took it as a challenge from the Wednesday crowd and decided to do it in the second period, a little prematurely, frankly. But
things are going rather well in the second period.
Things were going rather well, but the game wasn't over. You know, the game was not in hand at that point. So I think the Thursday crowd missed the mark a little bit, but the Wednesday crowd, you know, there was still 13 minutes left in that game, and the players were all like, you know, there's a lot of time left, but this is really cool. Like this is a good thing.
Yeah.
But it was a cool moment, and just wanted to shout out the Bell Center sort of game presentation people who let that moment breathe and grow organically with no noise in the building.
Because it was during a TV timeout, so it must.
Well, it leaked into a TV timeout, and you know, for people who don't go to the Bell Center all that often or ever, you know, every TV timeout has some sort of goofy promo kind of thing, you know, where either they're doing a quiz with a fan in the stands, or like there's a sponsored bit, you know, and so
pretty much everything is sponsored.
Everything is sponsored, and so everything has a commercial obligation to it, right? I mean, it's and so in that moment, the game presentation crew decided to put that aside and just let the wave happen, and they filmed the wave happening on the scoreboard, and so pretty cool moment, and I think it was reflective of what we want to talk about this week, which is just the, you know, the vibes, the good vibes. That was a good vibe moment at the Bell Center. There was another one obviously on Thursday, 7th consecutive win against the Florida Panthers, which is just impossible to get your head around, but it's a fact. Obviously not a very, very far from full strength Florida Panthers team, not even close actually, and missing probably definitely two of their two best players, and plus Brad Marchand wherever he fits on their hierarchy, but that's another key piece they were missing. But still, the Canadiens were missing a number of important players as well. So yeah, in an overarching sort of, you know, my question is, are these vibes real? Like, is what we're viewing with the Canadiens real? The road trip, they have 2 wins. They have a big matchup tomorrow night against the Detroit Red Wings, who are similarly riding a wave, similarly have good vibes. They can't lose, and the Canadiens have stayed with them step by step over the last few weeks. How real do you think what we're seeing is?
You mean the vibes in the stands, or what's happening on the ice?
What is leading to the vibes, which is what is happening on the ice? Yeah.
Well, I think it's real. I don't think that the Canadiens, you know, it's not as if they're never going to lose again, but I think that the foundations of a winning team, that's what we're seeing right now. And it's not new. I've heard some pundits talk about the fact that, in the past, the Canadiens didn't have the players to establish that culture, but you don't choose to establish a culture. It's not something that happens overnight. It's been building block after building block since Martin St. Louis has been named head coach of that team. And to me, I remember Martin St. Louis from some time ago when he used to say, I look forward to the time that we're going to be the coach. The team is going to coach itself. Basically, that's something
Yeah.
that he mentioned on a few occasions, way a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that he said was, I want to reach a point where our brand of hockey makes it so that no matter who's in the lineup, everybody will follow that that brand of hockey organically. And that's another thing that we're seeing right now. So the team itself is not has not arrived in terms of maturity, in terms of how good they can be. But I think that what we're seeing right now is definitely a testament of their progression towards that goal, and the fact that the brand that they've been chiseling at and they've been working on, it's slowly but surely defining itself. They're playing, literally they're playing with it. Their best players are adept at using that brand of hockey, and it makes it extremely exciting. And I think that when the fans react that way, it's because A, the team is winning, B, they're super entertaining to watch, and C, all the promises of the rebuild, even though the team is not ready to be a Stanley Cup contender just yet, all the promises of the rebuild so far point in the right direction. So the fans
Mm-hmm.
are basically just putting their stamp of approval on everything that's happened.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there's some imperfections, and really what you're talking about with players just entering into this environment and being able to step onto a moving train, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's because the train adjusts its speed to allow that player to jump on. Biggest case in point being Alexandre Texier. You know, like it's obviously, he's going to be one of the stars of the week if he has another game even
sure.
remotely like he had this week. Like and imagine how that's going to land in St. Louis when he's one of the 3 stars of the week in the NHL on a team that terminated his contract is going to miss the playoffs this year. So it's like, but in saying that, like, Alexandre Texier wanted to come to Montreal. There's a reason for that. And if you're another player who's looking for a change of scenery, seeing what Alexandre Texier is doing in Montreal, playing on their top line after having his contract terminated like 6 weeks ago, you know,
Mm.
and getting a hat trick and getting 6 points in 2 games on back-to-back nights, you're kind of like, okay, well, maybe that could be where I could turn my season around or my career around or whatever. Like maybe that's the type of environment that works for me. And so the fact that Texier has been able to succeed and is so happy, he had obviously back-to-back first star on ice interviews. And on Wednesday night mentioned in that on ice interview with Marc Denis after the game, how happy he is here. Like, and he's never
Yeah,
been happier as an NHL player in a city, and people knock Columbus all the time, but Columbus is a fine place to live and visit. It's I like Columbus a lot. As a hockey organization, not any history of success, and maybe that would be less pleasant, but yeah, he and then obviously St. Louis, he was miserable. He was miserable the whole time he was there. So that's one thing. Philip Danault was feeling miserable in Los Angeles, didn't want to be there anymore. Comes here, slides right into an important role that was conveniently vacated for him by Jake Evans, getting injured like literally the day after the trade. So he feels important and he's fitting in, and he
yeah.
has, significant missions on this team, killing penalties, taking important draws. He is now a face-off, get-off guy for them, which this team needed. And so, everyone feeling needed. Even Samuel
Samuel
Blais,
Blais. Yeah, I was about to
is
mention
like,
Samuel Blais. In a limited role, you can see that he fits right in.
yeah, and he's just doing what he does well, and more importantly, I think what he does well is all that's being asked of him. He's not being asked to do more than that, and even, I mean, to some extent, Joe Veleno. Joe Veleno, obviously, the first half of the season was sort of the target for. He doesn't have any points, basically, but just goes out and does his job, and that's all they need on this team. So there's obviously, I guess the point being that all these people that we just mentioned are replacements. for guys who are injured, and guys who are
Yeah.
like, Josh Anderson's out. Samuel Blake kind of offers what Josh Anderson provides. Jake Evans is out. Phil Danault does that. Kirby Dach's out to some extent, and Texier gets the spot on the first line that maybe Dach would have gotten otherwise. And Line is out, and there's no real corresponding player to Line's absence. But yeah, it's just Gooley's out, and Jacky has stepped up his game, but obviously he's been there a while. But Gooley has a haircut. He has a buzz. That was the big news last night, was that Gooley has a buzz cut all of a sudden. But anyhow, all these guys are going to come back at some point, and it's easy to look at Texier and be like, oh, well, how do they take him off the top line now? But the reality is that the brand that you just described and the brand that the Canadiens are showing on a nightly basis, and the buy-in that they have to what Marty's and the coaching staff are selling them on a game-to-game basis, and in terms from game plan to game plan, is making these guys look indispensable. But the reality is they're all replacements, and the Canadiens will be better off when the players they're replacing will be back. And as hard as it is to imagine Texier not being on that line, the reality is that for a long time before this week, that line wasn't producing. And while he looked fine, it was clearly not an optimal solution to play with Suzuki and Caulfield, and Suzuki in particular was getting quite frustrated with that situation.
Yeah, well, I think that Texier benefits from the Canadiens' brand of hockey, and he plays well within that style, but that doesn't make him the optimal candidate on the top line. He could play somewhere else in the lineup and probably find a level of effectiveness and comfort and happiness too. But when you mentioned Texier, Danault, and Blais, what do they have in common? They're three veterans. And usually when you have a team, when you talk about...
I'll speak French.
Yeah, there's that too. But they all... but you talk about...
Yeah, whatever.
You talk about jumping into a train that's in motion. Sometimes we'll consider, how can young players integrate a team where there is a veteran leadership, there's a way of doing things, but now it's veterans who are integrating a team that's basically run by a young core of leaders. Mm-hmm. And I mean, on the one hand, you could say, okay, well, veterans, they've been around, they've probably changed teams once in a while, and they know what it means to adapt to a new environment. So they've got that experience. Fine. But also, they were all more than happy to play the game and be willing to integrate that group that is now having a very more and more clear identity. Maybe that's still going to be refined over time, but it's getting more and more precise. It's like the picture is getting clearer. So I find it interesting because those guys also bring a lot of the experience that was lacking from a very, very young team. Mm-hmm. And they've been bringing something that's valuable. So yeah, we can talk about what's going to happen when the regular guys come back. But in the meantime, a guy like Philippe Danault, I look at him, and yeah, he might not be as productive as he was in his heyday, but I still see in his instincts a bit more offense than what Jake Evans can provide. So when Evans comes back, I'm not sure if he takes over Danault. It's going to be like two guys basically doing similar roles, but you have a very, very solid bottom six if those guys are your centers 3 and 4.
Well, I mean, we've seen it. It'll be like the bottom six last year, which was super important. When Dvorak eventually started to produce, but Dvorak was basically the player you just described, in the sense that you see the potential for offense in him, even though there was no offense coming, and was a source of great, great frustration to a large chunk of this fan base. And eventually it happened for him, and he became a vitally important piece of this team, and left a hole behind that was very important to fill. And I think Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton obviously deserve credit for pulling the trigger on that trade when they did, and paying the price that they did for it. Like they didn't overpay to get Philippe Danault. still don't understand it from Los Angeles's perspective, but that's fine. It does free up cap space for them. That should be and I think that's basically why they did it. But
well, if the alternative was to get 4 years of Jesper Kotkaniemi, they probably were better off with the second
Los Angeles. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I thought the demand was high enough for Phil that they could have gotten something that could help them now. But anyhow, that's besides the point. The fact is that this management team went out, identified a need, identified a hole, and filled it. Texier, kind of similar in the sense that at the time, injuries had started to hit. The Canadiens weren't playing very good hockey, and then they felt the need to bring in something to sort of fill a gap. And Texier has turned out to be a great fit. I don't know how much credit Gorton and Hughes deserve for like identifying him per se. I think the one thing it says about them, the Texier acquisition, is that this management team is good at identifying opportunities, and they're quick to act on them when they arise. Both those guys fit that. Noah Dobson fits that from the summer. Like that was something that came together in a week and wasn't part of their plan. And when Dobson became available, they quickly moved to make it happen. And so there's a certain decisiveness and ability to think on the fly that this management team has shown an ability to do. And I think these two guys are a good example of that. But it's just I was talking to Nick Suzuki after the game last night, and I was like, I just walked past a group of 5 or 6 guys sitting in the press box watching the game. And in the past, when you had 5 or 6 important guys, regular guys sitting in the press box, Nick's the only one who's never sat in the press box. He probably doesn't even know what it looks like up there. Like it's like, and he's been on the ice all that time, every time. And so I mentioned that I was like, in the past, you guys crumbled in this situation, and look at you now, you guys are thriving. Like how different does it feel? And he kind of laughed, and he's like, recently I've seen like online, I've seen stuff kind of fly by, like some of our old lineups from the past. And he just kind of chuckled. He's like, it's pretty different now. Eh? Like, it's like the depth of talent is vastly different. And
Rem Pitlick, top liner.
Rem Pitlick, Cam Hillis, HP riding shotgun with him and Cole for a while. True. And us, I think legitimately, when you think about Alex Texier, remember what you thought about HP playing on that line, and how maybe he'll be like, I remember I did a whole story on him being like the Canadiens' Alex Burrows, and I actually talked to Alex Burrows about it because I thought it was a possibility, because the way he was playing, that's what it looked like. And that's what, like, I'm not equating Texier to HP, but it's kind of a similar situation now. Like he's getting a shot on this line because there's no better alternative right now. Zach Bledzik, I think he might have played his worst game in a Canadiens uniform last night. Like he looks a little lost right now.
Yeah.
But that didn't work. They tried all sorts of things. They've obviously gone to the Anderson well on that line many times, and then Texier gets a shot and boom, it fits. And so, I would remember HP, Raphael Harvey-Pinard, for people who don't know what HP is, but Raphael Harvey-Pinard, I'm not talking about the sauce. He was once Alex Texier, and he at once upon a time looked like a viable, maybe long-term solution to an offensive role on this team. And eventually that he came back down to earth and is now in the AHL in the Pittsburgh organization. So I'm not saying that that's what the future holds for Texier, and he's a far better player than Harvey-Pinard is or was. But I would just warn against like temporary replacements and turning them into long-term solutions to a problem.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Texier's once had the tools in the perception of the Columbus Blue Jackets of being a mainstay on their top 6. Yeah. His career went sideways for a few years, and he's sort of regaining that back. I think that what's going to be interesting is that if there are reinforcements that come in way of healthy players coming back or injured players coming back, or a trade, he might be bumped down a little bit in the lineup, and you were mentioning Zachary Bolduc, the guy he replaced on the top line, I could very well see them fighting for the same spot, but on the third line later on in the season. Who knows? But
Or as
in the
line mates,
meantime, yeah. Or in the meantime, I think that he's building up his credentials again as a legitimate NHLer and as a guy who can not only be productive but also can help you in various departments. So if I'm looking way far down the road after this season when he's going to have a new contract to sign, maybe that he's going to have showcased himself enough that if what he's looking for is to be a mainstay on the top six somewhere, there might be a team, if he continues that way, that could be interested and perceive him in that light. But for the time being, having him, you giving those services, he's a great story. That's a great story. I mean,
yeah.
having him in that situation, I think it's amazing. And ultimately, because the thing, my only hesitation with yesterday is that yes, he had a hat trick, but you can look at the results and you can look at the process, and ultimately, was the Suzuki line like a threat all night? Not really. The numbers were good. I mean, the fancy stats were interesting. They didn't give up anything. That was good. That was good. But were they a dominant offensive force because of Texier on that line? No, but there was production. So you can focus on the production. But if you look at, is he the best complement to that line? Not really. And I would not blame the Canadians if they were wondering, well, what can it be the best solution for us if we really want to not fix that line, but optimize that first line for this season. For the future, it might be another story, but until the end of the season and maybe next year, you've got, we've been talking about Kirby Dach. When he comes back, he could be a good candidate to fit there. He would fit that role. But I mean, when we talked to Kent Hughes earlier this week, he sort of shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, he could be a possibility."
Yeah. He wasn't quite as definitive. He wasn't quite as definitive on Kirby Dach as he was on Oliver Kapanen.
Yeah, exactly.
Being a second line center,
No, he mentioned that Alex Newhook could be a possibility too. So there's not. Yeah. It's still. It's not as if that piece of the puzzle had been found and placed, on the puzzle.
Okay, so speaking of which, the Canadians faced the Calgary Flames on Wednesday. Took care of business rather handily. The following day, our friend and colleague Pierre Lebrun mentioned the Canadians' interest in Blake Coleman, who has 1 year left on his contract, the same as Philip Danault, the same as Brendan Gallagher, the same as Josh Anderson. The contract of that player, I would imagine, would be very appealing to the Canadians. The style of play, very appealing to the Canadians, and a guy who, I guess similarly to Texier now, you can comfortably play up and down your lineup in a variety of roles, and that you could give him a shot playing with Suzuki and Caulfield. If that doesn't work out, you could play him on a line with, say, Bolduc and Danault, and that would be an effect, and that would be the role that he played in winning 2 Stanley Cups in Tampa on a line with Barclay Goodrow and Yanni Gourde, and that was like an integral part of those wins. That line's ability to, extract like a physical toll from their opponents and be just responsible defensively and chip in some offense. And, he's a player that would be attractive to Montreal for that reason. And so Blake Coleman has a list of 10 teams that that the Flames could trade him to without his approval. The rest of the league is on a no trade list. Essentially, he would need to approve a trade.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the vibes, right? We were talking about the wave and all that scene. And the whole time, this is before Pierre's report, but we did a trade target story at The Athletic, and my guy was Blake Coleman.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, the first thing that popped in my head as that was happening Wednesday night at the Bell Center, especially as it leaked into the TV timeout and that environment got created in the Bell Center. Well, my first thought was like, how is Jacob Fowler taking this in? And that's what I wrote about that night. And I was like, this is this is invaluable for a player who is probably going to be the starting goaltender of this franchise for many years to come. This moment is an important moment in his introduction to this market.
The smile on his face, man,
dude,
he was
I mean,
so joyful.
He was, yeah, and that is, if nothing else comes of, and we're going to talk about the goalies later, but if nothing else comes of his time in this call up, and if he winds up going back to Laval, which is, frankly, he's making it more and more difficult for them to do, that moment will have been worth it. Mm-hmm. You know, like, just it's for him to experience that and to want to experience that again and again. That's worth it. But the second thought that came to my mind is, let's say Blake Coleman doesn't have the Canadiens on his list of 10 teams that he can be traded to without his permission. It would be hard for a guy like that to be standing in that building, watching what's happening, and think, nah, I don't want this. This is not for me. Like, this sucks, you know, like this, it would suck to be on the other side right now. So in that sense, I thought it was interesting timing, you know, that the Flames were there. That thing happens. That's a unique, like, you know, the Bell Center has a lot of unique elements to it. That was a unique thing that happened. Like, they've done the wave before, but over a course of a TV timeout, like, we've seen the crowd like yelling and screaming through a TV timeout, like that's happened, but the wave and just the environment it created in the Bell Center was unique. And it was
like, karaoke night at the end, you know?
Yeah. Well, the Olay started during that TV timeout so that for the television audience, you went to commercial with the wave happening and you came back. I imagine, I wasn't watching on TV, but I imagine you came back to the crowd being even louder and the Olay's happening. And you're like, you were just left to wonder, like, okay, what happened while we were gone? And that's what happened while you were gone. And I just can't imagine that Blake Coleman, like, that would be a huge selling point if ever he's approached and Craig Conway says, hey, listen, we have a deal with Montreal. Would you be willing to go there? I can't imagine he won't think back to that moment and be like, yeah, maybe I could get my head around that. I could do that. Even though, you know, he's from Texas, like, you know, chances are pretty good that he would probably prefer to go back to Tampa or go somewhere in the States, you know, like, it's, maybe that would be a selling point in his mind to accept a trade here. But what do you think of the report from Pierre? Because, you know, he sounded pretty definitive that the Canadiens are interested. Do you think that would be a fit?
Well,
forget the money for now, because I think the money, they'd have to work out the money somehow. But
yeah,
forget that.
Well, okay. Well, first the fit and then the term. First, the fit. The fit is great. I think that even though he's only 5'11", he plays bigger than that. I think that the Canadiens need players at this point that will be effective in the playoffs. They need that style of player. They need more sandpaper. They need, especially for that role, playing with Suzuki and Caulfield, they need a very effective F1, a guy who's solid on the forecheck. We know that, you know, Coleman plays a physical brand of hockey, but he can also, you know, finish plays. He scored 30 goals 2 years ago. He's a great penalty killer
this year.
Yeah.
He leads the Flames in goals right now. He has 13 goals.
13, yeah.
Yeah.
He's a great penalty killer too. He's got a lot of things that, in my mind, make him a valuable asset for Montreal. A great target. He will be a great target for a lot of teams if he's made available. Hence, the question about the term. He's got one more year left in his contract, and he's 34 years old. If you choose to go after a player of that profile, it means that you value giving a push to this team for the short term. You could try to fill that spot with a similar profile of player, but looking at a guy who's younger and who could stay with you for a longer period of time. And I'm not just talking about guys who have more than 1 year left to their deal. It's also that if the player has a positive experience during his stay in Montreal, at the end of his contract, you can consider legitimately saying, you know what, we'll sign you again to another contract. But Coleman would be 35.
Well, like Kiefer Sherwood.
That's
for
it.
Instance. Yeah.
But Coleman would be 35. maybe 36. I'm not sure. I don't know his birth date by heart, but it wouldn't be something of that sort, you know. So in order to, if you choose to win the sweepstakes for Blake Coleman, it's because you've really decided to make this more of a short term affair. So again,
He'll be
I
35
referred.
at the he'll be 35 at the end of November, just for the record. Yeah. He
Okay,
turns 35. He just turned 34 in late November, November 28th.
okay, right. Okay, so that's good. So that's it. Would be his 35-year-old season.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty much it, because after that, you know, he's not a long term solution at that age. So
But that's
I think that you have just to be aware that if you have a certain amount of ammunition or you know trade assets to trade, you cannot necessarily give too much for a guy that's going to help you for a year and a half. If they get him at an interesting price, well, then that's awesome. But I suspect that because of the type of player that Blake Coleman is, he might draw a lot of interest, drive the price up, and start making less sense for the Canadians.
okay. You know, this in the context of Kent Hughes speaking on Tuesday, which also happened since our last episode. And, you know, I think the year and a half left on his term is a critical year and a half in the development of this team. And that the year and a half left on Danault's term, rather than being seen as a downside, it's a positive. Like, they need to bridge this gap.
Mm-hmm.
They need to bridge to the time when Slafkovsky, Hudson, and Demidov in particular are hitting their prime. You know, when they're basically 23, 24 years old. You know, like at that point, I feel the Canadians will be ready to contend. Like that will be the start of their true contention window, if they indeed open one, which it looks like they're on the verge of doing. It will be when Slafkovsky, Demidov, and Hudson in particular are in the prime of their career. And, you know, Suzuki would be roughly 30 at that point, a little before 30. Like it'll be like a lot of sweet spots converging all at once. What do you do in the interim? What do you do to get there? And, you know, I thought Kent spelled it out quite well, you know, when he said, like, what we've done to this point has been obvious, and what we have to do when we get there will be obvious. You know, that's when you acquire rental players and you make trades that are purely focused on the present. What you do in between, that's what we're trying to figure out, basically, is what he said. You know, this is the challenge. And a player like Blake Coleman, even if the price is high, it can be viewed as just a critical part of navigating this transition phase where you're coming out of a rebuild and into contention. And how do you ensure that you exit a rebuild and enter contention? This is where rebuilds fail, is this moment when you have to go from rebuilding mode, where you're selling off assets, you're bringing in futures, you're drafting players, you're developing players. Like, this is quote unquote the easy part, you know?
Yeah.
I think you will remember that Marc Bergevin did this part extremely well. It's this current part that the Canadians find themselves in right now, where he had trouble, is finding these complementary pieces and having them on appropriate contracts that don't bleed into a time when your core pieces become the core of the team, you know? And so, to me, Coleman, that's worth something. Like, even if the price is high, and the price will be high, you know, Calgary doesn't have to trade him. They could just keep him. Like, it's, you know, he's a good player, and they like him in there, and he likes it there. So it's like, it's, and for the same reasons that Montreal would want him, that's why Calgary would want him. They want to remain somewhat competitive. They have a new building opening soon. Like, there's a lot of conflicting priorities in Calgary right now, where, you know, I think ownership doesn't really want to go into a full tank / rebuild.
Yeah.
And
it looks a lot like the Islanders in that sense.
Yeah. And they look destined to be like kind of a mushy middle team for, if that, for a while. Like I don't know what direction
Yeah.
they're
So
really going. But point being that when you mentioned the price being high, I think depending on how high, I think there would be some impetus or some motivation for the Canadians to meet a price like that because of how well he would suit their specific purposes at this specific time to navigate this very tricky, complicated, and sometimes, or not even sometimes, often defining moment of a rebuild. Right? Is this transition phase where you got to get through it with a certain level of competitiveness, and you got to get through it continuing to build towards becoming a Stanley Cup contender.
Well, the fact you brought up an interesting point regarding the intentions of the Calgary Flames, and I think that that's something that really could play in the Canadiens' hands, because if they're not looking necessarily for futures, they want to stay afloat, remain as competitive as possible. I think that the Canadiens, with a healthy-ish lineup, is in a position to trade not necessarily quantity for quality, but type of player A for type of player B. And they have a lot of roster players that can be interesting for other teams. So let's say if I'm Greg Conroy, I say my goal right now is to stay afloat, try to remain competitive, but how can I get younger? Well, the Canadiens can provide the Calgary Flames with roster players who are younger than Coleman, who can be under team control for a longer period of time, and who would help them, staying afloat. So yeah. I don't, for example, let's say Alex Newhook. Alex Newhook is hitting soon his mid-20s. He's a fast player, can play center, can play the wing. Now we can see they can play both special teams. He's got a lot of tools going for himself. Well, for the Flames, if they're looking to get younger, they could certainly find a good spot for this player on their roster, So that's just an example. You have younger players too. So to me, it's especially if you're not looking for a team that wants to sell that wants to acquire a first round pick or your top prospect, but they're looking for roster players, that's where it's advantageous for Montreal. The minute that you're looking for the long-term assets, I would prefer to keep that in order to acquire a player that is going to help you for a long period of time.
Well, that's why I think the Coleman fit, if Coleman sees it that way, works. Because, you mentioned I wouldn't personally trade Newhook for Coleman, but a guy I might consider trading, how long have we talked about the Struble, Jacky, a future is coming in the not too distant future where one or both of them will not be in the lineup, and frankly, for Struble's case, it's imminent. I wouldn't be shocked if Caden Gooley played tomorrow, but if not, it'll be sometime next week, and so when that happens, chances are pretty good that Struble's going to be out of the lineup, and you shouldn't just trade away your depth, but the reality is Adam Engstrom's back in Laval now. That's an option. If injuries hit again, David Reinbacher's in Laval now. He's going to be coming at some point. Obviously, he's a right shot. It's a bit different. And Engstrom plays the right, so it's a bit different. But he's a left shot. He could play the left. Struble, you look at who the Flames are dressing on D, they could use a guy like Jaden Struble, frankly. He'd be in their lineup right away. And they're losing Rasmus Anderson. Obviously, Struble's not a replacement for Rasmus Anderson, but still, just to say, their depth on defense is about to get worse. They have Zane Parekh, obviously, on the horizon, or in the future, that's going to be a big part of their team. But a more than serviceable, but a legitimate third pairing NHL defenseman for a guy who has a year and a half left on his contract when you're not really going to win in that window, I think would be very appealing to a team like the Calgary Flames. It's
wow.
just
no, I disagree, man. You could do a lot better if you're the Flames than Jaden Struble. Come on. This is a guy who
you would trade Alex Newhook for Blake Coleman.
I'm not saying that. I'm giving you,
but that's the example you gave. I don't think you would take a player of that caliber. Like Jaden Struble is an NHL player, and if you have to pick between Jaden Struble and a second round draft pick, if I'm the Flames and I want to remain remotely competitive in the near term, I'm taking Jaden Struble. instead of who is literally a second round draft pick. Like it's between the two. I think Strubal's a much
you agreed
more
with
interesting
me.
asset.
You agreed with me that this is the sort of player who would draw interest, and the price would be driven up. If you acquire Blake Coleman for Jaden Struble, it's because the price did not go up. And I run to the bank and I'm super happy. Thank you very much.
I don't understand your point of view on that, but to me, Jaden Struble I think has more value than you're giving him credit for. Like he's an NHL defenseman. They're playing Yan Kuznetsov on defense right now. Like it's like they're playing, I love Joel Hanley's story, but like he's playing defense for them right now. And I don't know if Jaden Struble is necessarily that much better than Joel Hanley, but I think he is, and he has a future. He's young. There's value there. He's a valuable player. And I'm not saying, maybe it would take a little bit more than that. Maybe you'd have to throw in a pick or maybe throw in another prospect. But to me, Jaden Struble is an extremely attractive trade commodity because he's a guy who has proven he can play a regular shift in the NHL, even though he's had his ups and downs, and that has value. That has real value, more than a draft pick would.
Well, sure. In the context of a team that is looking to fill their roster right now, it has more value. But you're still talking about a guy who's about to become the seventh defenseman on the Canadiens lineup, and traded for a guy who would be a fix on your top line. There's some serious disparity there.
Yeah, but he's a 34-year-old fix with a year left on his contract.
Yeah.
That affects his value as a player. Like the Flames are not getting. Yes, they might get a haul for him, but they're not going to get like. They're not getting a player like Alex Newhook. I know you just used it as an example, but it's just like you're not trading a young, established NHL player. Like that's what Jaden Struble is to me. Is that he's a young, established NHL player. It has enormous value, and it's like it's he's flawed, but he's not Jordan Harris. Like Jordan Harris, it was never easy to see like how he has an NHL future really, because he wasn't exceptional at anything. He's just good. No, he didn't have
really an identity. Yeah,
that's it. Well, Struble has that at least. Yeah. Like it's he's a
guy
who can be physical and he has feet, and it's like yeah, and I like him too. But it's hard to see where he fits in Montreal, and it's easy to see where he would fit in Calgary.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just thinking that if they choose to move Coleman, they'll get more than that. That's all I'm saying.
All right. I would be surprised if they got something more valuable than that. And if it's Struble and a pick or Struble and something, I'm just talking about the centerpiece of a deal. Like the Canadiens.
I'd be very happy.
I think the Flames would be very happy. I really don't understand how you're viewing this, because it's not as if Jaden Strubles don't just grow on trees. Like not every organization is blessed with the number of defensemen that the Canadiens have in their organization right now. It's like, and I'm looking at the Flames like lineup right now, and we just saw it on Wednesday. I mean, Hunter Brzustevich might have a future in the NHL. He's good buddies with Lane Hudson, but like Hunter Brzustevich, Joel Hanley, Kevin Ball, Mackenzie Weegar, Rasmus Anderson, Yan Kuznetsov.
Yeah, that's a terrible blue line. I agree, but I'm not disputing the fact that Struble would fit there. That's not what I'm saying. We're talking two different conversations. What I'm saying is that
we're having the same conversation, is the fact that Jaden Struble has enormous value as an NHL player. NHL players in and of themselves have value when you're trading a guy that has 18 months left on his contract and he's 34 years old.
But for teams who are knocking at the door and say Blake Coleman for the playoffs is the type of guy that we need, and he's going to make $4.9 million next year, we're going to trade for him and deprive you of your best goal scorer, teams will be willing to give up more.
How many contending teams ever trade guys off their roster to bring someone in? Name me a contending team that's ever done that.
There's not a ton, but with the cap going up and the flexibility, I think that I don't know. We'll see.
I don't think contending teams generally have enough guys. They're generally not willing to touch their roster, their NHL roster.
Mm-hmm.
The Canadiens would be sending them an NHL roster player. plus whatever,
Yes.
a fourth
Yeah.
round pick or whatever. To me, that's probably not something that the Flames are going to be inundated with offers like that, where you're plucking a guy off that team's roster and putting it onto yours.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that's going to be. They might get a lot of interesting offers that might ultimately be more attractive because Calgary decides that we need to build for the future. And if they decide to do that, I agree with you. The Canadians should not be throwing first round draft picks and whatever at the Calgary Flames, because those could be more valuable in a different kind of trade, perhaps in the offseason or something. I'm with you on that. But the Canadians and frankly, some of the forwards, when this team is all healthy, not Newhook necessarily, but there's any number of guys that are there's NHL players who are not going to be able to make the lineup when everyone's healthy,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Plus,
And
if they do what you said they would, let's say that they were to trade, Struble for Coleman, they would still have to shed some salary because that's going to be an issue for them. So
yes, no, big time, and that's again, that's why I said leave the money out of it, because the money's complicated. I don't really know how they would go about doing that. I mean, the one thing, and I mean, maybe we should get into Kent Hughes' press conference now, because
sure, yeah,
it's kind of interesting when he was asked about Laine's timeline and how he looks close to returning, and Kent's like, no, I think we're pretty much on the plan. We're pretty much on the plan. The plan being for him to come back after the Olympics, right? I mean, I guess the front end of that timeline was just before the Olympics, and the back end was just after, or sometime in between. Because the reality, and what Kent can't say in front of the cameras, is that when Laine's back and healthy, that he's not on LTIR right now, to be clear, but Doc and Goalie are, and when Doc and Goalie come back, someone else is going to have to go on LTIR.
LTIR.
Yes. So it's they can't have everyone healthy. When Ken answered your question and said, yeah, when everyone's healthy, we're going to have some hard decisions to make. That's one of them. So him sort of downplaying how ready Laine looks was interesting. But I think the overall vibe that I got was, they're not ready to do the big win now move, which I guess you could argue Coleman would kind of be, and so maybe it goes against the vibe that Kent gave off, but again, like what I came out of it with is that, they do want to figure out how to get through this next 2 to 3 years, let's say, in an effective way and in a way that encourages winning while setting up their contention window. And that's why I just feel that's why I feel Coleman's contract specifically fits what they're looking to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's but the hesitation between the short term and long term outlook, that eternal balance between present and future is still first and foremost in Kent Hughes' scores. He's it's a preoccupation for him.
It is, but we've already seen, the Dobson deal and the Danault deal indicate that, that's slowly shifting. I think the balance is still leaning future, but I think instead of building for the future now, they're just trying to prepare the future. Whereas the extent to which the future is a concern is they don't want headaches down the road. The most telling line that Kent Hughes gave, I think, in that whole thing is that you can't just get rid of contracts.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that you can't just get rid of contracts. And they don't want any cumbersome contracts getting in the way when Demidov's going to be making $10 million or whatever he's going to make. And
Well, that's why the 27-28 season is such a big thing. With
yeah,
all those contracts that are off the books, not only Liney at the end of this year, but you were mentioning Anderson, Gallagher, Dano. We can add to that Carrier. God
yeah,
knows how Sam Montembeault is going to play at that point in his career, but those are all the contracts that won't be optimal by then, and then you can
hmm
decide, okay, which ones do we renew, which ones do we let go. But there's going to be all that money then that's going to be drawn towards the sexy nucleus, the sexy core of the team, for the
right.
one that's going to help you go to, hopefully, to the promised land. So I think that the Canadians would be wise to make sure that when everything points in that direction, that if there is ever a need during that period, that they have the tools to address it, and that they
hmm
won't have. I understand your earlier point about the fact that it's a transition period. You got to get there, and any veteran you add, it's not only just his own contribution to the team, but also his impact on his teammates. And I think that the prime example of that would have been Sidney Crosby, obviously, that it's not just what he provides, but how
That's a whole separate category. Yes.
it is. It is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. He's in a thing of its own, but I think that they need to keep looking, and I suspect that they do, that keep looking at 2027, 28 going forward and say, okay, what are the moves that we can do to make sure that we kick ass at that point? Because right now, what's happening this season, it's all good, it's great, it's fun, but to a certain extent, it's gravy because the team is more competitive than Kent Hughes thought it would be. They're almost ahead of their plan. So,
Well, yeah, not only that, but they're not, and the important part of this season and next leading into 27, 28, excuse me, is getting playoff experience. Like if you want to be a contender in 27, 28, you got to play playoff games. And in an ideal world, they would play more than 5 this year, And so like, and getting that playoff experience, especially with how frankly shell-shocked they looked at the beginning of the Capitals series, but compare that to how they looked by the end, when they looked much more competitive, they looked much more able to handle the environment and the style of play in the playoffs. I thought like Hudson being the best example of it, like in games 1 and 2 in Washington, he looked shell-shocked. He looked overwhelmed by what was going on. But by game 5, I thought he was kind of back to himself. Demidov, same kind of deal. Like by game 5, he was a more effective version. And frankly, God knows what he's going to look like this year, but that's invaluable. Like it's him having those 5 games going into a hypothetical playoff scenario this year, because it's still not locked in, obviously. But so I think a key part of that transition is ensuring that you're getting your young core a playoff experience so that by 27, 28, they will be somewhat of a playoff hardened group, and like,
yeah.
Tampa, like Coleman's a great example in the sense that he was in Tampa, and how many kicks at the can did Tampa need before they became Tampa and before they became a Stanley Cup champion? Like they had a lot of playoff disappointments. They made the final in 2017, I want to say, or something like that, or 2016.
16,
But
yeah.
but they were a young team. They were an emerging team. They went on a run, and that disappointment of losing in that final fueled them to get to that point. So that's 15. Where I think 15. Sorry. So I think the balance has to incorporate that. Like that is when they're planning for the future. That's part of it. That's part of their planning for the future. And I agree with you. 27, 28 is definitely the target year to open a contention window. By then, Demidov will be 23, Slav will be 23, Demidov will be 22, Slavkovsky will be 23, Hudson will be 23, Fowler will be 23. I mean, it's Kapanen will be 20,
nice
24.
Runway.
Like Kapanen will be 24, runway. Suzuki will be 28, Caulfield will be 27, I guess at that point. Goalie will be 27. I mean, or 26. Anyhow, they'll that grouping of players, Suzuki, Caulfield, Goalie, Newhook, if you want to include them, Doc, if you want to include them, that group will be in their mid to late 20s, which is perfect. They're still in their prime. The next group will be hitting their prime. And then you'll have an underneath, like Hage will probably be on the team by then. And maybe Jarofsky will be on the team by then. Like, who knows? Like, they'll have this under group coming up that will be the young players on that team, you know? And so getting the Demidovs and the Hudsons and the Slavkovskys and even the Caulfields and that the two groups, getting those two groups some playoff experience in the interim, I think is vitally important to that 27-28 season being an actual opening of a contention window, like where they can prepare to have deep runs in the playoffs every year.
You mentioned Michael Hage, even though his name was uttered once or twice during the Kent Hughes media avail the other day. It seems as though he was referred to constantly because it was always there. We've got more talent coming. We've got more talent coming. So Jarofsky, yeah. And first and foremost, I think that he talks about Michael Hage. Sure, it could be Jarofsky, it could be Reinbacher.
It's Reinbacher too. I think Reinbacher is a big part of that. Yes,
but I feel like but Michael Hage, you know, is pretty front of mind these days, especially after his performance at the World Juniors. And the other component is that Kent Hughes has always been very sensitive in making sure that without, you know, unrolling the red carpet in front of a prospect, making sure that you don't block his way too much, block his path to the NHL into a regular role. So I think that he's going to be cognizant of that in making moves that won't necessarily block Michael Hage becoming a regular player with the Canadiens. You know, he might turn pro at the end of this season, and who knows where he's going to be or what sort of role he would have next season. But I think that it's clearly a player that they see in the picture starting in 27-28. So that's also, I mean, you don't want to assign a player to a certain slot before he's played a single game in the NHL. But at the same time, I think that they value him enough that they're going to manage in part based on what he's accomplished and what he's promising.
The odd thing from a team building perspective is, you know, Hage is a right shot, right? They have a lot of right shots.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's an odd problem to have, but like up front, they need more left shot guys. And like I would have to believe that Hage will turn pro at the end of his college season. I suppose anything's possible, but I don't see why he wouldn't. It would seem like the natural thing for him to do, and then finish the season on either an AHL contract, or if they intend on, like, this is going to be the tricky part with Hage is, does he get, Fowler got to burn a year, Hudson got to burn a year. Like, all the guys that they've brought from college got to burn a year of their contract. Now, they don't have to play in the NHL to do that. Just simply signing an NHL contract for this season allows them to do that. But, you know, not that he's the same caliber of player, but when they brought Luke Tuck out of college, he didn't get to do that. And that was actually a big point of contention as to that contract happening, was, will he get to burn a year? And the Canadiens basically refused to let him burn a year. But I don't, you know, obviously they wouldn't play hardball with Michael Hage that way, so he probably would get to burn a year. But I just think that, you know, this is where the Coleman conversation is also relevant, right? Like, if you think Michael Hage could play in your top six as of next season, and that's not to say, like, you know, if they acquire Coleman, it's not as if like, oh, he has to play in the top six or he's useless. It's quite the opposite. That's kind of the beauty of a player like that, is you can play him on your fourth line, and that's fine. You know, that's actually that's more than fine. He fits any identity that you want him to fit, kind of. But it does create for a lot of NHL forwards on your books, and potentially does make it harder for someone like Hage next season to emerge and take a role. But if Hage shows that he deserves it, I'm sure the Canadiens will find a way to accommodate him. It's not going to be it's not going to be difficult to do that. So,
And it could be 2 years down the road because Coleman's got another year, so it could be that eventually Age would replace Coleman once his contract's up. You know?
yeah, totally. And not
Yeah.
only, I mean, as we just mentioned, like a lot of things open up in that season. That's why 27, 28 is such an obvious target year. And, Ken Hughes can't say that in front of cameras, but when he was asked, like, when do you expect this to happen? I mean, you just have to open up the Canadiens cap page and it's obvious that 27, 28 would be that year. And so that's what I think makes this season and next so interesting. Like next year, like let's say the Canadiens make the playoffs. Let's say they go out in 7 games in the first round, but they're competitive and it's viewed as generally as a step forward from their playoff experience last year. Next year, you would have to think that the Canadiens would want them to win a round and get into the second round and see what that's like. And so next year, it becomes far more justifiable and might actually make some degree of sense to go into the rental market. Like, I don't know what the price is going to be for Kiefer Sherwood, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the Canadiens to pay a huge price for Kiefer Sherwood if you don't know that you're signing him to a contract after. And even then, he starts to enter into the realm of being a guy who blocks, whose contract could become cumbersome. Like he screams red flag, right? Like who sets a career high in goals at the age of 29 suddenly becomes like this amazing goal scorer. He's probably more likely going to be the player that he's been for most of his life, right? Which is still a very useful, attractive player, but he's going to get paid like a goal scorer and he's probably not going to keep scoring goals the way he is right now. So, but next year, paying a somewhat high price for a player like that as a rental to ensure that your young core gets into a different phase of the playoffs would probably make some degree of sense in terms of a grand rebuild plan sort of thing,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You've got to be in it to win it. So
yeah, but you
it's
have to know what it's like to win it
yes,
too.
yeah, for sure. Another aspect that was interesting from the Kent Hughes press conference was he had to address the goalies. I think that at the very beginning of his press conference. So the three man rotation is not going to survive for very long, and it's interesting because if there was a true rotation that was going to be established for the time being, well, Jakob Dobish already skipped his expected start. So, what do you? I mean, I gave you the other day my 2 cents on that. That I thought that if they wanted to kill two birds with one stone, you know, maximizing their chances of getting a playoff spot, that was to keep Jacob Fowler because he's the best goalie of the three right now, and also to help bring back Samuel Montembeault in a positive way and reshape him. And he's been giving very promising signs lately. You keep those two, and you basically you sacrifice the other goalie, Dobesh being waiver exempt. It seems like an interesting play to me, but where are you at when it comes to the three goalies?
Well, I don't think I've really changed my stance in the sense that until they need the roster spot, they don't have to do anything. But it's definitely a curious development that Dobesh skipped his start. I mean, they basically since December 28th. So Fowler played the last game before the Christmas break and the first game after the Christmas break. So that was actually his second consecutive start, and he did that obviously when he made his debut. But so he gets the start on the 28th in Tampa. Montembeault gets the start in Florida. Dobish got the start in Carolina. Fowler, St. Louis. Montembeault, Dallas. Would have been Dobish, Calgary. Should have been maybe, but went back to Fowler for Calgary. So what's evident, and it's this is not some sort of expert opinion. It's just obvious watching the three of them play. And the more we see Fowler sort of behaving in an NHL environment, you know, the future of the team is in Fowler. And the question is, again, balancing future and present is at some point, and again, I don't want to take this for granted, and I think I've just kind of assumed that it's going to happen, but I think the Canadians, to some extent, do assume it's going to happen. At some point, Fowler's going to hit like an obstacle, a roadblock. You know, like it's going to happen where he might string together 2 or 3 bad games. What do you do then?
Mm-hmm.
Until that happens, this is where I differ. My opinion has changed. That until that happens, there's no reason to send Fowler down.
Yeah,
You can't send him down in anticipation of that happening and wanting to prevent it. In a way, that happening might help him in his development. You know, like this is okay. You've seen what it's like when everything's going well. This is what it's like when it's not going well, and this is how you find your game. These are the details you need to work on to do that. And so, do you send Dobesh down in the end? Like, if that doesn't happen with Fowler before the Olympic break, and you have guys returning and you need that roster spot, then yeah, you'd have to send Dobesh down.
Well, what's
and
going
it's
to
looking
be
it's looking that way now, right? Because the fact that he's only had 1 game since December 20. Like, he played in Pittsburgh on December 21st. He's had 1 start since that start in Carolina, which was shaky. But that game as a whole was shaky. It was weird. Yeah. It was a weird game, but you know, he won the game, but he gave up 5 goals. That's the only time he's played in 2 weeks.
What's going to be interesting is that when you think of the Canadiens' next game on Saturday night against the Detroit Red Wings, in terms of standing, it's probably the most important game so far this season. Yeah. They're neck and neck, those 2 teams at the top of the Atlantic Division. So what sort of, do you just say, well, it's Dobesh's turn, so we're going to go with him, or you're going to go with the guy who's going to give you the
Fowler.
best chance to?
I would be shocked if it wasn't Fowler.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. So I'd be shocked if it was Dobesh. The other, I mean, it could be Monty.
It could be Monty, but
I wouldn't fall off my chair. But if it was Dobesh, I would be truly surprised. But the tricky thing is that in the long run, could you have as a tandem? Because we mentioned how Montembeault's contract is up after next year too. Mm-hmm. Do you see in the long term the Canadiens entering a competitive window with 2 young goaltenders like Fowler and Dobesh? And if you don't, and if you think that they need a veteran among the 2, a veteran to play with Fowler, how do you bolster Dobesh's value? Because there's truly a quality NHL goalie there. But it's just, we know that traditionally goalies don't draw a ton in trades. And also you're in a position where he has not enough of a track record to really inspire people to say he's a can't miss, or there's not that much work to be done with him. You know, so I feel like if the Canadiens decide at some point that because of Fowler being there and being the goalie of the future, they'll have to part ways with Dobesh in one way or another, there's a fairly high risk that they won't be able to draw a significant return. And that would be unfortunate, because I wouldn't be surprised if 5 or 6 years down the road, Dobesh has asserted himself as a good 1B guy in the league, you know?
Yeah. I mean, to answer your initial question, I think the veteran goalie to play with Fowler could very well be Montembeault, and they just sign him to another contract. And I see him in a very similar vein and in a very similar position to Mike Matheson, where he'd be willing to take a lesser contract in order to be part of this team's contention window and to even be a backup goalie or a 1B to Fowler's 1A. I could totally see him. He's already done that once. The contract he's on right now, he could have done better than that. You know, he probably could have done better than that on the open market at the time. And so, but his desire to stay, I mean, not wildly better, but probably somewhat better, you know, I mean, like it's,
yeah.
And so I mean, that seems to me to be the ideal guy. He's a good teammate. He just wants to win. He's from here. He loves it here. He would want to be here for when this gets good. You know, he would want to sit in the shade of the tree that he helped to plant. You know, like he's I could see that happening. And so, and Dobesh, yeah, maybe they do have to trade him eventually, and maybe they don't get a whole lot for him, and that's just life. You know, I mean, that's the reality in the NHL. Like, but there is a shortage of goalies around the league right now. But I don't think they're there yet. You know, they don't have to do that.
No.
He this is his last year, I guess, of waiver exemption, I would imagine. They can ride this out, but the more Fowler plays and the more he talks in terms of just how he carries himself, it's this is kind of the bar I've been using since he came up, because before he came up, and especially the night they called him up, all I was thinking about was that Jacob Fowler is 21 years old. That's all I had in my mind. And that there are no 21-year-old goalies in the league. Jesper Wallstedt is the youngest goaltender in the league, and he's 2 years older than Jacob Fowler. And so, and he's a rookie, you know, and he's, you know, and so it doesn't happen that 21-year-old goalies are able to succeed in the NHL because they don't play in the NHL generally. And that's all I had in my brain. And that's why I was feeling a little trepidation over this move. But I've told myself, like, take that out of, like, watch him, talk to him, talk to teammates about him. If you didn't know he was 21 years old, there's nothing that he gives off that tells you that he doesn't belong in the NHL.
And Marty said as much too.
He said as much. Well, that's why I asked him that question in Boston, because that's the night that I came to that realization. Like, stop defining this guy by his age. Just look at what you're seeing. And I wanted, like, that's why I think the question I asked is, like, has Jacob Fowler shown you anything that tells you he doesn't belong in the NHL? And he said no. Well, maybe his age. And that's the thing, is that if you just get that out of your head, and it's hard to do because NHL teams tend to, I don't want to say overthink, but they definitely give deep consideration to how you develop a goaltender. I mean, Detroit's coming to town. You know, Sebastian Cossa is not an established NHL goaltender yet. Not only that, but they traded for John Gibson when they used a first-round pick on Sebastian Cossa. Like, how long ago was that? 5 years ago? 4 years ago? It's been a while.
Yeah.
Cossa hasn't demonstrated that he should be in the NHL, and I think that's probably a concern for Detroit. But there's definitely a lot of thought and consideration and a lot of hesitancy to rushing a goaltender to the NHL. Far less so that, like, it's funny. I was talking to Slavkovsky about Fowler on Wednesday night, and I'm talking to him, and as we're talking, it dawns on me that they're the same age. You know, they're basically the same age. And so, but I'm talking to Slavkovsky as a guy in his fourth NHL season. He has a lot of experience. Obviously, he's coming into his own now. And then, so I mentioned at some point, I asked him a question about Fowler being 21, and he started to answer. And I was like, well, I guess you're also 21. He's like, and he's like, yeah, but I can make a mistake or two and get away with it. He can't. And that's what it comes down to, right? Like, that's the different kind of pressure that is on a goaltender than someone like Slavkovsky. And so it's, but I think the Canadians are, to some extent, coming around to the fact that maybe they shouldn't be defining this kid by his age. And the fact that they called him up to begin with showed a willingness to do that, you know, to willingness to be like, maybe this guy's different. Maybe this guy, the normal rules for developing a goalie, maybe they don't apply to this guy. And maybe it turns out that they will. But until we see that, you know, I think it'd be good to not overthink it and just be like, listen, this is our best goalie right now. And he objectively is. There's no way around it. And we're not destroying his development by having him win games for us or play for us. And if we reach a point where we think his development is being impacted, and I don't mean like 2 or 3 bad starts, I mean like a consistent downturn in his performance, then you can consider sending him down to Laval.
Yeah.
But and if you need that roster spot, as crazy as I thought it was when you suggested it, if they need that roster spot, they might just have to send Dobish down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the last 2 goalies who played significant time in the NHL at age 21 were Spencer Knight and Carter Hart.
Right.
So Spencer Knight,
neither of which are examples of optimal goalie development.
No.
No.
But Spencer Knight right now is finally coming into his own, so that's great. But it's not. Yeah. It was not. It didn't come right away. I mean, heck, they traded for they got Bobrovsky.
They signed Bobrovsky. They signed Bobrovsky a week after drafting him.
Yeah.
And they knew when they drafted him that they were signing Bobrovsky. The whole league knew they were signing Bobrovsky, and they still drafted this guy. And the fact that they drafted him probably wound up allowing the Canadians to draft Cole Caulfield.
True. Yeah, that's one of the dominoes that fell. So as for Dobish, well, we'll see. I mean, I don't want to draw the comparisons too much between Fowler and Price, but Dobish, I'm not sure if he's going to have the chance to have a Dobish spring like the Halak spring in order to bolster his value and become very interesting to another team.
Right.
The situations might not be conducive to him shining in such a way because you've got a very performing young goalie right now, plus Montembeault, who seems to, sorting himself out. So that's very good too.
Yeah. Another great start. I mean, obviously, aside from the brain cramp on the first Bennett goal, but great start, and actually didn't allow that goal to like crush him, and he played quite well after that, and so that was encouraging. I'm just looking at Spencer Knight's, rookie season. 32 games played, 19-9-3 record, 908 save percentage, 279 goals against. It's kind of. Fowler's kind of tracking in that direction if he spent the whole year in Montreal. So it's like it seems, Fowler's at 9-12 right now. So but yeah, he, obviously Spencer Knight had other kind of personal matters that got in the way, and so it wasn't only about his goaltending. And obviously Carter Hart had significant personal matters that got in his way.
What? I don't know what you're talking about.
That have nothing to do with goaltending, but yeah, it's not unprecedented. You're right, but it's excessively rare, and that's why.
Yeah. What I mentioned it to highlight the fact that it is unusual.
Yes,
not that it happens. I mean, it happens very rarely.
But it's something that NHL teams fear. Like, not fear. They're very conscious of it, and they don't want to skip steps with goalies more so than any other position, really. Yeah. And so, but again, I mean, Fowler the other night, man, after the game, like just hearing him talk about the environment and soaking in the atmosphere at the Bell Center, and then Stu Cowan actually asked him right towards the end of his scrum, asked him about Kent Hughes' comment about how mature he is and how mentally strong he is, and how unusual that is for a player of his age. And his answer to that question was phenomenal. I mean, just like the first thing he said is, "I'm glad other people think what I think about himself." Right? Oh. Right? Oh, okay. Yeah. It was a great quote. I mean, I included it in my piece, obviously, but I'll just read it now for anyone who didn't read it. Sure. But it's so. The quote is, "I'm glad to hear that what I think is what other people think, because I like to have fun and joke around with guys off the ice and be pretty unserious at times. But I feel like when the game's on, I have a good balance and understanding that hockey's a big part of my life, but it isn't everything. And with that comes, one goal doesn't define who I am, but I want to make every save that I can. I was born playing this game, wanted to play at the highest level and be a big part of that. So whatever I can do to stay mentally strong and understand it's going to take a lot more mentally to break me than other guys, I just think you could take skill out of it. That's more important."
That's
21.
great.
It
Yeah.
was really good. It just came out of him just like that. Like he didn't even
Mm.
think about it. It was just like, and so, and talking to some of the other guys, like, I mean, it's the confidence this guy exudes. We see it on the ice, but it's just like, it sounds like just everything he does, he doesn't feel out of place there. He doesn't
No.
feel like he doesn't belong there or that, but but at the same time, he's cognizant. He also said on Wednesday night, you know, I want to make the most of this opportunity because you goalies don't get this opportunity at my age. He knows that, but he doesn't care. Like it's just like it's not.
I'm gonna
It's
show them anyway. Yeah.
that's it exactly.
Yeah.
So he's
Yeah.
changed my mind. I can admit when I was wrong. I don't even know if I was wrong. I just feel like the concerns I had are legitimate, and the concerns I had are the reasons why you don't see 21-year-old goalies in the NHL. But he's with every start, he's just alleviating those concerns. Like he just seems, you know, we're talking about we're 8 games in now, so it's a decent sample for a goalie. You know, like it's not nothing, and he's had like maybe one bad game in those 8. You know, that game in New York is really the only trip that he had. You know, like so. Let's see where it
Well,
goes.
wrapping things up here, when you say that he feels like he belongs, the vibes are good on this team because I feel like right now everybody feels that they belong,
Mm-hmm.
feels that they want to be there, and the environment makes it so that it could interest other players from outside the organizations to want to be there too. So
Yeah,
it's a good situation for the Canadians to be in right now. So
yeah, and I think that honestly, that's perhaps the greatest achievement of the Jeff Gorton, Ken Hughes regime so far. And when Jeff Gorton arrived, I don't know if you remember, but he mentioned that he wants to make Montreal a destination again. That's one of the primary goals that he set out, other than like,
yep.
talked a lot about modernizing the Canadians and there was a lot of things that he wanted to do, but it was all in the aim of making Montreal a destination. And they're in the process of doing that. And I think the 2 games at the Bell Center this week, but particularly that TV timeout against Calgary with Blake Coleman standing there soaking it in, that's part of and the atmosphere in the playoffs last year. Like players took note of that, you know, and like it's and the more of those moments the Canadians are able to create through their performance on the ice, the more attractive they will be to other players, and the more often Ivan Demidov shows up in highlights that other NHL players see, or that Lane Hudson continues to do what he's doing. Pretty crazy stat going into the game last night, but since he moved to the left on December 11th, he entered the game last night 6th in NHL scoring.
Yeah.
Not among defensemen, in
At all.
NHL scoring.
Overall, yeah.
Overall, 1 point behind Leon Draisaitl. I can actually
that's...
update that right now. Let's see where he's at right now. Since that date, he is still 6th. Still a point behind Leon Draisaitl. 22 points in 15 games since that date.
But you know, it's we've been talking so much, and it's been not us necessarily, but it's been part of the discourse that Montreal is a hard place to play. It's a big market. It's not for everybody. Rah, rah, rah. The downsides of Montreal, there's no shortage of ink that's been spilled on that. But the advantages, the good side for the players of playing in a market where it matters for people when the team wins, there's no better place to play. All that stuff, I think that the Canadians could milk that cow a bit more, and maybe that they do it to a certain extent. It's not necessarily a promotional video or anything like that, but I think that I wish that they get to a point where the attraction of the market outweighs the inconveniences, the negatives, and maybe the pressure that some players might see, because all those guys who have signed at a discount and say, I want to be here, they welcome that pressure,
Yeah.
and they see that together they can still build a winning team. So
But to be fair, all those players who did that have not experienced the true pressure of Montreal. This group of players has gotten a pass on that because of the transparency in which Gorton and Hughes have conducted this rebuild. They've been the fans were given an honest assessment and plan for what they wanted to do. The actual pressure is going to start now. Like this is, and if this team, like, you remember last year at this time, the Canadians were coming off their Christmas trip. It was wildly successful. And then what happened going into the Four Nations? They tanked. They hit a major lull. And I do think that lull is probably somewhere in the back of the minds of Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton. Like, that could happen. Like, this is a young team. They're playing really well. It doesn't seem like it will. But they're showing the consistency that they didn't show last year, because that lull that they hit in January was their second or third, probably the third lull of the season by that point, And so, so let's see. Like, they have 3 weeks of hockey left until the Olympic break. And a big test on Saturday night. Like, this is a referendum on how to rebuild a team. You could take the slow, methodical approach of the Detroit Red Wings, which has been incredibly slow and incredibly methodical, or somewhat of a fast track rebuild that the Canadians are trying to pull off here. So I think from a narrative perspective, I think it's a very interesting matchup tomorrow night. Two teams trying to emerge out of a rebuild and really enter into an eventual contention window, facing off with at the top of their division, more or less.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So on that note, we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. We'll be back on Monday for our subscribers episode. If you are not yet subscribed to the Basu and Godin Notebook, you can do so by getting either a monthly plan or an annual plan at BasuandGodin.com. That's our Substack page. And so it gives you access not only to our Monday episodes, but also to our chat. There's a very, very fun, dynamic, and growing community there. So look that up, and that's it. So we'll be back on Monday. I'm
just curious. So for our non-subscribers, so every night our subscribers on the Substack chat, they have a game day thread. I'm actually just going to check right now how many posts last night's game day thread got, because we've been over 1,000 in some of these.
Oh,
I want to see last night. See, look how far back I have to scroll just to get to last night's game, because all of this has happened today. Man, I'm still going. Here I go. Where is the game day thread? Oh my gosh, still going. Sorry, I didn't know I'd have to go. I have to go back this far, but in any case, it's there it is. 1,500 replies in last night's game day thread. So it's a very vibrant community. It's a fun place to hang out during the game. There's a lot of interaction. It's very healthy. It's not a very negative environment. So yeah, I think that's a big perk of getting a subscription. And at the very least, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to this YouTube page, or on Apple Podcasts if that's where you're listening.
There you go. All right, everybody. See you on Monday.
Basu